First of all, I just want to introduce acknowledge the many co-authors to this paper. There's been a group of us working for 3 years on a project which is abbreviated to Kingfish for Profit, and it's part of the Rural R&D for Profit program of the Department of Agriculture and Water Resources. The companies involved represent research agencies, so SARDI, New South Wales DPI, also the fish farming companies, Huon Aquaculture and Clean Seas Tuna, and the two major Australian aquafeed companies, Skretting Australia and Ridley's. So firstly, about Yellowtail Kingfish, just to introduce you, and there's a lovely picture alongside me here from FRDC of a whole animal. It's, as Patrick mentioned, it's often abbreviated to YTK. Its scientific name, Seriota landii. It's marketed under a variety of names. Hiramasa is probably the most common one, used by Clean Seas Seafood. It's one of a number of Seriola species. It's not the only one. There's a number of other species farmed around the world. It's quite common. It's in the Indo-Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. It's coastal and oceanic in nature. Farmed in Japan for many years, but this species only a very small quantity. Another species, the production levels are around about 160,000 tonnes a year, so quite substantial. And finally, it's now farmed in Australia, Ecuador and New Zealand. So why the interest in yellowtail kingfish in Australia? And the key aspects is that it's appearing more and more as volume of production increases in the various markets. You'll see it more and more at the supermarkets and also in the medium to high value restaurants. And it's a very good species for culture. It's got characteristics such as reliable year-round spawning. The hatchery culture is reasonably well known now. Fast growth rates, multiple and good quality products, and a reasonably high market price. And you might wonder why we're comparing it to Atlantic salmon farming, but that's because very much Atlantic salmon farming is a huge industry worldwide. You can see there that the global production's around the 2.5 million tonnes, worth about 15.4 billion per annum. In Australia, it's also a long-term aquaculture industry. It's been going for many years. It's our largest industry, and I particularly like following it because I think it's an industry that's had its own challenges and overcome most of them as they've arisen. And I think that provides incentive that other aquaculture activities can do the same. Finally, it's something that we all tend to eat. We see it out there often. Most of the consumers purchase it. Myself, for example, we normally have it probably once a week for a meal. So it's something that's well known, well marketed, and familiar to the consumers. Just very briefly, there's a little bit of the history of the two industries. Yellowtail kingfish farming is across the temperate part of Australia, from Western Australia, South Australia and New South Wales. Alternatively, Atlantic salmon farming is very much focused down in Tasmania. And for both industries, the number of companies at the start have consolidated, so there's only a small number involved. Clean Seas Seafood in South Australia, which is a public listed company, or it is now, and it started in, Yellowtail kingfish farming started in South Australia in 1998. There's Indian Ocean Fresh Australia in Western Australia, a private company, and then Huon Aquaculture, that's well known for the salmon farming, but they've been doing trials in New South Wales, and they've been very successful, and now they're looking at commercialising, probably more so in Western Australia. Alternatively, in Tasmania, there's a very small number of companies involved. Most are vertically integrated, from doing hatchery production through to their own processing. But Saltaz is a dedicated hatchery, and there's one company that focuses on grow out. And you can see the difference in production at the current level. Yellowtail Kingfish is very much an early developing industry. It's been out there for a while, but it's still growing. And further discussion will be about the potential for that growth. But at the moment, it's about 3,000 tonnes production per annum, with 38 million, and probably with under 100 FTE direct positions involved. Atlantic salmon, on the other hand, 63,000 tonnes, $740 million, with about 2,500 people employed and continuing to grow. If we look at the rate of development, I was interested to go back and just compare how fast things had started and whether Atlantic salmon had faced the same sort of challenges and slow growth as kingfish. So what I found out was that essentially the fertilised eggs were first introduced from interstate into Tasmania in 1984. 1985, the first fish were put out in sea cages for a grow-out trial. They developed a hatchery, a government-industry partnership in 86. First commercial harvest, or trial harvest, I guess, of 53 tonnes in 1987. And then by 2000, the industry had started to grow, and there was about 11,000 tonnes production. On the other hand, Yellowtail Kingfish started in 1997, and they started, because there was no hatchery, they started with broodstock collection, got the hatchery up and going in 1998. It took some time to sort out the challenges with nutrition of the juvenile fish, and it was not to 2004 that about 1,000 tonnes was being produced from grow out. So those initial years, that kingfish happened about 7 years to that level, whereas Atlantic salmon was probably a bit faster. The figure I've got there is 16 years to 11,000 tonnes. And then the final one on this timeline was the Yellowtail Kingfish reaching 2,000 tonnes production in 2011 after 14 years. And then there was a bit of a hiccup after that, and the industry went back, and you'll see from future slides that production levels still fairly low. So what are the farming attributes of both species? Yellowtail kingfish is fantastic for the temperate environment because of the water temperature tolerances. It's a marine species but has a reasonably good tolerance to salinity. The growth rate's excellent. I've indicated there 3 months to 30 grams when they go out into the sea, and then 12 to 24 months to 3 to 5 kilos. An FCR that's not as good as salmon, but it's great. It has improved greatly from research, and it's expected to continue to improve from further research. And then a stocking density fairly similar to Atlantic salmon. If we look at the product attributes, they're not that different, although the colour, obviously, of the flesh is one's orange and the other is a white to pale pink. But they've both got good high oil contents. They're well accepted by the consumer. You can create a variety of products from them and cooking styles, and they're both high in omega-3s. Atlantic salmon's slightly above yellowtail kingfish, but they're comparable. So what are the key challenges for the future? So for yellowtail kingfish, from my observations, it's very much that market development. I think the early days, the production really got ahead of market development, and balancing those two is absolutely critical. It's now at the position where a lot of the technical issues have been sorted out, so production could increase rapidly, but the market has to keep up with that. The second one is that from day one it was known from the Japanese where they were farmed in Japan, that there were a variety of parasite and disease issues, and getting on top of those and staying on top of those will be very important. And there's ongoing research funded by FRDC supporting things in that area, such as vaccine development, etc. Very important for the companies that the local governments, the state governments support them with infrastructure. There's opportunities to partner with the companies to make sure that they have what they need onshore. Finally, they need to be cost effective, and the operating cost for most aquaculture ventures, about 50% of that cost is associated with the feed. And the project we've done over the last 3 years, the Kingfish for Profit project, has been very much focused at maintaining or reducing the cost of feed and improving feeding efficiency. Importantly is the social licence to operate. That's an ongoing thing across fisheries and aquaculture, but these companies have now got quite large lease areas approved, but obviously in the future there may be new entrants, or they may need changes or further area, and similarly as they develop they need to maintain that social licence and work with the public to understand what they're doing and making sure that they understand that it's sustainable. Because it's a developing industry, government legislation is really critical. The governments have been supportive, the state governments, the federal governments, but there's still challenges ahead and they'll need that for the future. Skilled staff and greater market competition from other Seriola species, not to mention other species such as cobia and groper, etc. But one of the things here is that onshore facilities are being built in Europe, and they're now looking at successfully growing Seriola landii for the European market that our companies are targeting. Quickly, just a little bit on the research we've been doing. That's the full name of the project, Growing a Profitable, Innovative and Collaborative Australian Yellowtail Kingfish Aquaculture Industry, bringing whitefish to the market. So moving the focus away from the high-value sashimi product, trying to reduce operating costs so they can target more the whitefish fillet market. And just some of the major outcomes: improved food utilisation, reduced input costs such as fish meals and fish oils with replacement products, and the improved social licence to operate through more targeted feeds. So, Australia, the future of the market. We had AgTrans Research did an independent report for this, for the federal government, looking at the return on investment for the R&D dollar, and they looked at the potential aquaculture production from the existing lease areas, and what they came up with are these figures and from various locations. I think the important thing here to do is highlight that it's quite substantial, but it was with a 20% probability of achievement based on previous research and looking at the development rate of new industries. And probably realistically, it's more likely a third to a half of that could be expected as sales over that time frame. Future opportunities: improvement in growth rates and feed utilisation through the nutrition and genetics disciplines of science, containing rising feed costs, increasing productivity, full utilisation of existing leases, and new industry entrants. Still, the small volume is targeted at the premium high-value industry segment, marketing segment, and there'll be continuing differentiation of product for different market segments, and they're targeting both the domestic and international markets. And Patrick will be very pleased. The last slide, the conclusions. So I guess answering the question that was asked is that it's certainly not their equivalent of the salmon industry at this stage. It's still in a developmental stage, still very small volume of production. The good news is that there's been a lot of technical know-how developed, both practical and through research and development, and that's being applied. And the companies that are out there are quite significant ones and are innovative and applying those results to achieve growth. There are markets out there. There's been a lot of market. Some of these companies are operating commercially and they've tested the market, and there's real opportunities out there for increased volume. It can be expected to grow. I'm sure it will. The exact amount is still unknown, but it's definitely going to grow. And there will be a move to continue to support the high value market, but also with lower value products. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, one final thing. Can I just acknowledge again the support we've had from Department of Agriculture and Water Resources through the Rural R&D for Profit program. Thank you.